At 60, I finally understand something I wish someone had forced me to hear when I was 32. Not gently, not politely. I wish someone had shaken me and said it out loud before life taught me the slow way. Because the truth is, some realizations come too late to fix everything, but just early enough to hurt. My name is Nova. I'm 60 years old now, and for most of my life, I thought the biggest mistakes would be loud, obvious, impossible to ignore. I was wrong. The most painful ones are quiet. They sound like excuses. They look like patience. They feel like, I'll do it later. If you're listening right now, I don't want you to feel scared. I want you to feel seen. Because when I was in my early 30s, I was exactly where many of you are. Busy, responsible, tired, but telling myself that's what adulthood feels like. I didn't feel lost. That's what makes this story dangerous. I felt fine. At 32, I used to believe time was something I owned, like it was sitting quietly in a savings account, waiting for me to withdraw it when I was ready. I told myself I'd speak up later. I'd take risks later. I'd be honest later. I didn't know later has a way of disappearing without warning. I remember one specific morning. Nothing dramatic happened. No tragedy. No crisis. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee going cold, staring at a wall I had looked at every day for years. And for a brief second, a thought crossed my mind that I immediately pushed away. Is this really it? I didn't ask it loudly. I didn't sit with it. I just swallowed it and moved on. That moment didn't feel important. But looking back now, that was life knocking softly. If this feels familiar, pause for a moment. How many questions have you pushed away because they were inconvenient? When I was 32, I was good at surviving. I paid my bills. I showed up on time. People relied on me. From the outside, I looked stable. Inside, I was postponing myself. And postponing yourself doesn't feel like self-betrayal at first. It feels like maturity. I had things I wanted to say back then. To my partner. To my boss. To myself. Words that sat heavy in my chest. Boundaries I should have set. Truths I should have spoken. But I was afraid of being difficult. Afraid of rocking the boat. Afraid of losing what little stability I had built. So I stayed quiet. And silence, I learned later, is not neutral. It slowly teaches people how to treat you. Somewhere in my early 30s, I became very good at explaining my unhappiness away. Everyone feels like this. This is just a phase. I'm lucky compared to others. And yes, gratitude matters. But gratitude should never be used to silence your own truth. If you're finding yourself nodding right now, gently remind yourself to stay. Stories like this are easy to abandon halfway through, just like the thoughts we avoid in our own lives. Before I go further, let me say this softly. If you're here on Silent Life Lessons, and this story is already pulling something out of you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Not as a favor to me, as a promise to yourself that you won't scroll away from things that matter. At 33, I told myself I was still young. At 35, I told myself I was being realistic. At 38, I told myself change would be too complicated. Do you see the pattern? Every year had a reason, and none of them felt like fear at the time. The truth I didn't want to face was simple. I was afraid of saying the thing that would change everything. Because once you say it, you can't pretend anymore. I remember lying awake at night, rehearsing conversations that never happened. What I would say if I were braver. If I were clearer. If I didn't care so much about disappointing people. In my head, I was honest. In real life, I was polite. And politeness cost me more than I knew. Here's a confession I've never said out loud before. I didn't trust myself back then. I thought my discomfort was immaturity. I thought my longing meant I wasn't grateful enough. So instead of listening, I corrected myself. Over and over. Have you ever corrected your own feelings until you couldn't hear them anymore? By my mid-30s, something subtle had changed. I stopped imagining different futures. Not because I didn't want more, but because imagining hurt too much. Hope became dangerous. So I traded it for routine. People don't warn you about this part. They warn you about failure. They warn you about heartbreak. No one warns you about numbness. About waking up one day and realizing you've been emotionally quiet for years. There was a moment, small and almost embarrassing, that should have woken me up. A younger colleague asked me about my dreams, just casually, and I laughed it off. I changed the subject, because the honest answer would have made my throat close. That night, I cried. Not loudly. Just enough to feel the weight of everything I hadn't said. This is the part where you might expect a turning point. A big decision, a dramatic exit. But life doesn't always give you that. Sometimes it gives you repetition. Same days, same conversations, same silence. Until repetition itself becomes the warning. At 39, I realized something terrifying. I had become very good at enduring a life I didn't choose. And endurance looks a lot like strength, until you realize it's just unexpressed fear. If I could speak to my 32-year-old self, I wouldn't give her advice. I'd ask her one question. What are you not saying because you're afraid of the consequences? Because the thing I finally said at 60 didn't come out of courage. It came out of exhaustion. And I wish more than anything that it had come sooner. There's a sentence forming in my chest as I tell you this. The sentence I waited decades to say, but I'm not ready to give it to you yet. Not because I want to tease you, but because some truths only land when you understand the cost of silence first. If this story is stirring something in you, remember it's not an accident. Some stories don't entertain. They reflect. In the next part, I'll tell you about the moment everything cracked open. Not in a dramatic way. In a painfully ordinary way. The moment I realized the price of not speaking had finally become higher than the fear of being honest. And when I tell you the exact words I wish I'd said at 32, you might feel them forming in your own chest too. I didn't expect the moment to come the way it did. I always thought the day I finally spoke would arrive with shaking hands, maybe raised voices, maybe tears spilling out in public. But the truth is, the moment that changed everything was painfully quiet. It was an ordinary afternoon. The kind you forget as soon as it passes. I was sitting alone, scrolling on my phone, listening to the world outside my window, when I saw a picture of myself from years ago. I must have been around 32 or 33. I remember staring at that woman on the screen and feeling something tighten inside my chest. She looked hopeful, not happy exactly, but open. Like she still believed life could bend if she pushed gently enough. And that's when the thought hit me so hard it almost felt physical. I had spent decades protecting everyone else's comfort while slowly abandoning my own. Have you ever looked at an old photo and realized the person in it trusted you to take care of their dreams? That afternoon, something cracked. Not loudly, not all at once. Just enough to let a little truth leak in. I started replaying moments I had buried so well I forgot they were even there. Conversations where I almost spoke. Decisions where I almost chose differently. Every almost lined up behind me like quiet witnesses. When I was in my early 30s, I believed being patient made me mature. I believed being agreeable made me kind. I believed staying silent made me strong. No one told me that patience without direction becomes delay, kindness without boundaries becomes self-erasure, and silence slowly teaches people you don't matter as much as you do. I want to pause here, because if you're still listening, this isn't just my story anymore. It's touching something personal, isn't it? And if that's the case, stay with me. Stories like this don't rush. They unfold the way truth does. By my late 30s, I had mastered the art of explaining myself away. I told myself that wanting more was selfish, that speaking up would only complicate things, that other people had it worse, so who was I to complain? These thoughts felt responsible, logical, even noble. But deep down, they were fear dressed up as wisdom. Here's another confession I never said out loud. I was afraid that if I said what I really felt, I would lose love, lose approval, lose stability, and I didn't trust myself enough to believe I could survive that loss. Does that fear sound familiar? There was a night, sometime in my early 40s, when I realized I had stopped arguing with myself. That should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt empty. When you stop questioning your life, it's not always because you've found answers. Sometimes it's because you've given up asking. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling this dull ache I couldn't name. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was the weight of unspoken words pressing down year after year. Words I had practiced so many times in my head that they had lost their sharpness, but never their importance. People talk about regret like it's dramatic, like it arrives all at once, screaming. That's not how it came for me. Regret arrived slowly, disguised as routine. It showed up as indifference, as exhaustion, as the quiet belief that this was just how life was supposed to feel now. If you're in your 30s listening to this, please hear me when I say this part matters. The habits you build around silence don't stay small, they grow with you. They become part of your identity. At 45, someone asked me a simple question. Are you happy? I smiled automatically. The way you do when the honest answer feels too heavy. And that's when I realized something terrifying. I didn't know anymore. I had spent so long prioritizing what made life smooth that I had forgotten what made it meaningful. That question followed me for years. It echoed in grocery stores, in traffic, in quiet moments before sleep, and every time it surfaced, I pushed it away. Not today, not now, later kept winning. Until one day, it didn't. The turning point didn't come with drama, it came with clarity. I was 59, sitting in a waiting room, listening to the sound of my own breathing. And for the first time, the fear of staying silent felt heavier than the fear of speaking. I suddenly saw my life not as a collection of years, but as a pattern. And patterns don't change unless something interrupts them. That's when the sentence I had been avoiding for decades finally formed clearly in my mind. Not shouted, not emotional, just honest. But saying it meant accepting something painful. It meant admitting that I had participated in my own silence, that no one had stolen my voice. I had handed it over, piece by piece, in exchange for comfort. This realization didn't feel empowering at first. It felt devastating, because responsibility hurts more than blame. Have you ever realized that the door you've been waiting to open was never locked? Before I tell you what I finally said, I need you to understand this. The moment before you speak your truth is often lonelier than the moment after. Because before, you're alone with it. After, at least it's real. I wish I could tell you that when I finally spoke, everything instantly got better. That people applauded my honesty. That life rewarded my courage. It didn't. But something else happened. Something quieter. Something deeper. I felt whole for the first time in years. And that feeling, that's what makes me ache for the woman I was at 32. Because she deserved that wholeness sooner. If this story is hitting close to home, I want you to know you're not late. Not yet. As long as you're listening, something in you is still alive and asking to be heard. In the next part, I'll tell you exactly what happened when I finally said the sentence I'd been holding back for almost 3 decades. And more importantly, what it cost me and what it gave me in return. When I finally spoke, it was not a grand declaration. There were no cameras, no applause, no one waiting to witness my moment. I was sitting across from someone I had loved for decades, someone I had trusted, someone I thought understood me. And I said it. The words were trembling, almost unrecognizable even to myself. I've been holding back parts of me for too long. That's all. Just that. But saying it felt like opening a dam. Suddenly, years of fear, doubt, and unspoken feelings rushed out. I felt like I was both drowning and floating at the same time. Why is it so hard to admit that we've been hiding pieces of ourselves? For decades, I had perfected the act of compromise. I had convinced myself that bending to others' needs was selflessness. But, as the words left my lips, I realized that selflessness without honesty is a cage. And I had been living in one. I had been living small because I was scared. Scared of rejection. Scared of judgment. Scared of losing people who, in truth, may not have been truly present for me anyway. There was a pause after I spoke. A long, tense silence that made my heart hammer in my chest. I was afraid, for a fleeting second, that I had made a huge mistake, that I had broken something irreparably, and yet in that silence I felt a flicker of relief. A tiny spark that whispered, "This is real. This is truth. And truth has power." Nova, at 32, would never have believed it. She would have thought the world would end if she voiced such a thing. But it didn't. It felt like breathing after years underwater. I want to pause here because if you're listening closely, this is important. The courage to speak often doesn't arrive fully formed. It sneaks in quietly, between moments of reflection, doubt, and longing. After that day, the pattern of my life began to shift. Small at first, almost imperceptible. But each time I voiced a little more of myself, my needs, my boundaries, my truths, and the weight lifted slightly. And the world responded in ways I hadn't expected. Not with perfection, not with unbroken harmony, but with acknowledgement. With space for my voice, and with new possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. There's an emotional reset in every life, a moment when what you've been holding back collides with what you need. For me, it was quiet, intimate, almost invisible to anyone but me. And yet, it changed everything. Have you ever had a moment where speaking one sentence could alter the course of your life? I realized something fundamental: silence isn't always golden. Sometimes, it's a trap. And sometimes, speaking, even in fear, is the first step to freedom. There were mistakes, of course. Speaking my truth didn't erase the years of compromises, nor did it instantly fix the relationships I had strained or the opportunities I had missed. I had to navigate discomfort. I had to face disapproval. I had to accept that not everyone would like the person I was becoming. Do you feel that? That tension between who you were, who you've been, and who you're becoming. But here's the thing I want you to notice. Even amidst the fear, even amidst the fallout, there is growth, there is clarity, and there is a certain joy that comes from finally being unashamedly yourself. For the first time in decades, I could answer questions about my life honestly without filtering them through layers of expectation or fear. I could see myself clearly. I could acknowledge my own needs. And for the first time in a long time, I could feel hopeful without guilt. In the quiet moments that followed, I kept asking myself the question I had avoided for years. If I had known at 32 that speaking up wouldn't destroy me, what would I have said? What doors could I have opened? What joy could I have claimed sooner? It's tempting to think, I'll speak when the time is right. But often, the time only becomes right when you decide it is. Waiting for permission, for clarity, for the perfect moment, it rarely comes. Nova's story isn't just about me. It's about every person who has silenced themselves for fear of being judged, for fear of losing love, for fear of making mistakes. And here's the most human thing of all: fear is not the enemy. Fear is a signal. It tells you that something matters deeply. And when you pay attention, when you respect that fear but choose to act anyway, you create a life that feels real. The lesson I wish Nova at 32 could have learned is simple, yet profound: your voice matters. Your choices matter. And your life is yours to claim, even if the world around you seems unready for it. Before I continue, I want to gently remind you, if this story is resonating with you, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Not because I ask, but because there are countless other stories like yours waiting to be heard, and supporting them means keeping voices alive. And now, as the story unfolds, you'll see that speaking my truth didn't just change my inner world. It rippled outward in ways I never imagined, teaching me lessons about love, friendship, and the subtle art of timing. In the next part, you'll hear exactly what happened when my long-held words met the world, how people reacted, and the small, quiet victories that reshaped my days. You'll see why it's never too late to reclaim your voice, even decades after the perfect time has passed. The days after I finally spoke were quiet, almost deceptively calm. The world didn't explode, and yet everything inside me shifted. Each morning I woke up, I felt a little lighter, a little freer, as if speaking one truth had loosened years of invisible chains. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, but it was profoundly real. I began noticing small things: how I laughed without holding back, how I didn't apologize for my opinions before even voicing them, how I allowed myself to choose for me instead of bending to everyone else. At 60, I realized the moments I thought I had lost forever, moments of courage, of boldness, of unapologetic self-expression, were never truly lost. They were waiting, quietly, in the spaces I had neglected within myself. And the truth I finally spoke became a bridge, not a bomb. It connected me to others in ways I hadn't expected. Friends, family, even strangers began to respond to the real me. Some with surprise, some with tears, some with understanding, but all with acknowledgement. I want to ask you something. How long have you been waiting to speak your truth? To take that first step, to reclaim that part of yourself you've silenced? It wasn't easy. There were moments of regret, times I questioned if I should have said less, or waited longer, or hidden myself again. But each time doubt crept in, I reminded myself that silence had already cost me too much. The life Nova at 32 thought she had to live, to fit, to please, to avoid conflict, was not the life I wanted at 60. And it doesn't have to be the life you settle for either. Some days I still reflect on the choices I made, the chances I didn't take, the words I never said. And yes, there's sadness. But alongside it, there's gratitude. Gratitude for the courage I found when I thought it was too late. Gratitude for the clarity I gained when fear and hesitation no longer held me hostage. And gratitude for the quiet joys that came simply from being honest with myself and letting the world see me as I truly am. Nova's journey is a reminder that age is not a barrier, it is a lens. What we learn, what we risk, what we finally speak, all accumulates into wisdom. And sometimes, the most powerful words we speak aren't for the world. They're for ourselves. They remind us that our life belongs to us, fully, without apology. So I ask you now, as you sit here listening, what have you been holding back? And what would happen if you let yourself speak it today? If this story touched you, consider leaving a comment below. Share what truth you've been afraid to voice, even just one line. Someone else reading it might feel seen, understood, or inspired to speak their own truth. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to claim their voice, share this video with them. Let's create a small ripple of courage together. Remember, it's not about perfection, it's about honesty. Not about dramatic gestures, but about the quiet, steady courage to be fully you. Nova at 60 wishes she'd said this sooner, but she's grateful she said it at all. And if she can, so can you.